Because I was so glad when they said unto me, let us come into the house of the Lord. Our feet shall stand within thy gates, O Jerusalem. O magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. We know that love makes the world go round. Love changes everything. You can change a situation by just interjecting one sentence of love, one feeling of love. You can change a whole atmosphere. And so what we know the world needs is love. We're going to sing a little bit about it without Dion Warwick. How about that? What the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's just to love. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for some, but for
This morning for our time of prayer, we're going to say the names of those that lost their lives in the Pulse massacre. We're going to remember them in God's presence. So let's have a moment of reflection. Let's have a moment of remembrance this morning as we say their names. Stanley Almodovar, Amanda Alvera, Oscar Aracena Montero, Rodolfo Ayala, Antonio Devan Brown, Daryl Roman Burt, Ángel Candelario Pardo, Juan Chávez Martínez, Luis Daniel Conde, Corey James Cannell, 7, Eugene Crosby, Dianca Deidre Drayton, Simón Adrián Carillo Hernández, Leroy Valentín Fernández, Mercedes Marisol Flores, Peter Omi González Cruz, Juan Ramon Guerrero, Paul Terrell Henry, Frank Hernandez, Miguel Ángel Honorato, Javier Jorge Reyes, Jason Benjamin Shasafat, Eddie Justice, Anthony Luis Lareno Tisla, Christopher Andrew Lionel, Alejandro Barrios Martinez, Brenda Marquez McCool, Gilberto Silvia Menendez, Kimberly Jean Morris, Akira Monet Mary, Luis Omar Ocasio Capo, Gerardo Ortiz Jimenez, Eric Iván Ortiz Rivera, Joel Rayon Paniagua, Jean Carlos Mendez Perez, Enrique Rios, Jean Carlos Nieves Rodriguez, Xavier Emmanuel Serrano Rosado, Christopher Joseph San Feliz, Ilmari Rodriguez Solivan, Edward Sotomayor, Shane Evan Tomlinson, Martín Benítez Torres, Jonathan Camuy Vega, Juan Pablo Rivera Velázquez, Luis Sergio Vielma, Frankie Jimmy de Jesus Velázquez, Luis Daniel Wilson León, Gerald Arthur Wright. And we say the prayer that our Lord.
Bartender, signal, the last call. Clock struck 2 a.m. Some closed out their tabs, others were still dancing. Nobody knew what was lurking around the corner. And then at 2:02, Kate walked in, armed with a military-style rifle, assault rifle, and a handgun. Hate came through the front door of Pulse and mowed down everybody in its path. And our world changed in an instant. Life as we knew it was no more. News started slowly trickling in, and it was, well, tricky. We knew there was a shooting. Those of us on the outside looking in couldn't imagine the horror those on the inside were experiencing. They couldn't unsee what they saw. Over the course of the early morning hours, we were informed of a hostage situation and a terror plot. And as the sun rose, we rose to the news that at least 20 were dead. As dawn turned to day, our stomachs turned as we learned the numbers of the dead were increasing. By mid-morning, the last count was 49 plus 1. Hate was killed by those sworn to protect us from it. And we, the people of the city beautiful, and those all around the world, rose up and vowed that we would not let hate win here, and that we would not be defined by this horrific act, but by our response to it. We declared through our mayor that we were Orlando united, Orlando strong. And then that love we shared was let loose in the streets, not only here in Orlando, but every street in every city, every country of the world. We lined up to donate blood. We offered supplies to those who may need it. We hugged and we held tight. Every friend or even stranger we saw that moment and every day after that. Over the next several, we heard of the deep, excruciating sorrow that those who experienced this dreadful act were experiencing. Phones rang on the dance floor and in the bathroom, and they were left unanswered. Friends would never call back. Folks would never return home to their mothers. But it was love that called, and it rang over and over again. Sorrow and love, like the hymn writer penned, sorrow and love flowed, mingled down. Nadia Bowles-Weber, in her weekly newsletter, commented on the nature of our world right now amidst the pandemic that we are experiencing. And she remarked how a friend of hers had died of the coronavirus, and there was no way to gather as a community to mourn their loss or to sing familiar hymns and read familiar gospel stories and shower each other with love.
God.
And she wrote that song lyric from When I Survey the Wondrous Cross came to me, and she said, see from his hands, his head, his feet, sorrow and love flowed, mingled down. Perhaps, she said, these two have always been mingled, so that in this loss there is love, in this grief there is love, in this sadness there is love. That is why she continued, I am a theologian of the cross, because only a God who is not unfamiliar with suffering can mingle sorrow and love into a balm for our souls. Right. Orlando faced great sorrow and responded with great love. We looked hate right in the face and we said, you aren't welcome here. And then we started lavishing love everywhere we went. That's, you see, what love does. It's like spilled tea. It just gets on you no matter what side of the table you're sitting.
Yeah. Right.
Before we delve in, will you pray with me?
Yes, God.
Sorrow
God.
and love, they coexist because you really can't have one without the other.
That's
if
true.
we didn't love, we wouldn't feel sorrow. And if we didn't feel sorrow every now and then, we wouldn't extend love. And so God, as we come today to learn more about how to love you by loving each other, may we see in each person the face and the body of Christ. And then, God, may we be that face and body of Christ to the whole world, so that, God, in the midst of their sorrow, they might see in us the love of God that's rich and pure. It's measureless and strong.
Hallelujah.
A love, God, that forevermore endures. The saints and angels song. God, may those angels sing to us and through us this day. In the name of Jesus.
Hallelujah.
Amen. We're on the third deposit of our Reckless Love series, and today our focus is to learn to love God by lavishing love on our neighbors. And so I would offer up for our consideration this morning that we might do this in a threefold manner.
Okay.
Number one, we do no harm.
Right.
Okay.
Number two, we offer love generously and freely.
Uh-huh.
Number three, we give thanks.
Give thanks.
Right? In his book, Reckless Love, Pastor Tom Berlin writes about the shooting at the Jewish synagogue in Pittsburgh in October of 2018. He said the shooter hoped his actions would break loose an avalanche of hate and violence toward his victims. He wanted others, you see, to follow his example so that more lives would be destroyed. And by feeding and growing sentiments in his own heart, he felt justified in his actions to wound and kill others whom he did not see as children of God. By contrast, Berlin writes, Jesus calls us as his followers to do no harm.
Do no harm.
Jesus wanted them to grow their capacity to love to such an extent that there was no room left in their lives for anger, contempt, or hate. And so in our scripture lesson for this morning, Jesus said in the 6th chapter of Luke's gospel, Jesus writes that, hold on, let me get to it because I want to get it just right.
All right, Pastor.
He said, if you're listening, here's my message.
All right.
Keep loving your enemies no matter what they do. Keep doing good to those who hate you. Keep speaking blessing on those who curse you. If someone strikes you on the one cheek, offer the other cheek as well. Keep praying for those who mistreat you. Do no harm, if you will. Or like the Apostle Paul put it, do not repay evil for evil, but overcome evil with good.
Right.
It was one of the sisters of one of the slain from Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina, who said this when she faced her sister's killer in a courtroom in June of 2015. That young man had been welcomed into their church, to their Bible study. And when they closed their eyes in prayer to end their meeting, he opened fire and ended their lives, killing 9 people, including their pastor and several of his parishioners. But Beth Ann Brown said, my sister would have urged me to love this young man. She taught me that our family was built on love and that we have no room for hating, so we choose to forgive, do no harm. Saints, it's my prayer that we continue lavishing love even when we're faced with evil. The year after Pulse happened, it was June of 2017, we gathered at the site that afternoon, and it was a service for the families, for the survivors and the first responders. And I had been asked to participate in the service, and I was going to do the closing prayer, but the service went too long because there were some politicians that were there, so you could just, you can imagine. So anyway, my prayer at the end got cut, and so the show director who was doing that, Nima, he said, Rev Terri, just go outside to the front of the fence. We were behind the fence where others couldn't get in, and he said, go out there to the front and just pray out there. there was lots of people that just go pray out there. So I made my way around the fence and through the gate, and as I approached the front of the building, there were hundreds of people that had gathered, and they were getting just close enough to try to hear what had been happening. And as I walked around that corner, and as I faced the corner of Kaylee and Orange,
Right.
I saw above the crowd this man with a sign, and it said, "Sin equals death." And underneath it, something about, homosexuals were sinners, and so they deserved this death, and they were headed something out to the lake of fire or something like that. And I just thought to myself, please go away.
Right.
And as soon as I saw the sign, other people saw it as well. And they turned from me to look at him, and people started hollering, and I said, no, we're not doing that. We are responding to hate with love. We're not going to respond with hate. We don't do that here.
Come on.
Amen.
Come on.
And as I was about to pray, I began to pray my prayer that I had written out, and the crowd just circled around me, and we held hands, and as far as you could see, there were people linked together. And as I was praying, the crowd started responding, "Love over hate, love over hate," over and over again, so much so that the sign man kept on stepping far away. Though we had been harmed, we did not respond with harm.
In kind.
We
Yes,
do
God.
the very thing they don't even deserve, nor do they expect. Love does no harm. This, saints, is how we might lavish love to our neighbors and in our communities. But secondly, I would offer up that in order to lavish love, we've got to offer love freely and generously. Give, the scripture says, and it will come back to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. The measure you give, Jesus said, is the measure that is returned. My mind goes back to the 21st chapter of Luke's gospel, and here we see that Jesus has been in the temple, and he has been discussing things with the scribes and Pharisees, and then the scripture says he then turned his attention from them to some wealthy people who were depositing their donations in the offering boxes. There were offering boxes for temple taxes, and then there were boxes for their free will offerings. Verse 2 says, a widow, obviously poor, came up and dropped 2 copper coins in one of the boxes. Jesus said, "I'm telling you the truth. This poor widow has made a larger contribution than any of those rich fellas." You see, they're giving from their surplus, but she's giving from her lack. She's giving all that she had to give. Can you imagine giving all that you had to give? She gave even when her give up was gone. She gave even though she lacked. She gave even when it hurt. And this scripture lesson reference is referring to money, but I believe it insists on the same thing our scripture lesson from Luke 6 was asking us. Give love in whatever form you have, whether it be monetary or otherwise, but whatever it is, give it generously and freely. It's what the world needs now, as we sang to open our service earlier. So how might we lavish love, saints, on our community by offering love generously and freely without expecting anything in return? Perhaps it's sympathizing with those who lost a loved one at Pulse and standing there between 2 and 5 a.m. every June 12th to offer a prayerful presence to those who are still struggling. Those who for the first time could come back and walk around and stand on the hallowed, holy ground where Pulse sits, where many people's pulses ended. But ours beats on so that their love can continue. Perhaps it's marching in the streets of our city to insist that Black Lives Matter and trans lives matter. because those are the ones dying at alarming rates right now in our country. Just this week, perhaps it's voting for our representatives, our senators, our presidents who support the rights of the LGBTQ plus community. Those who insist that we get federal protections under the law to ensure we can't be fired or denied access to housing or public accommodations simply because of who we are and who we love. Perhaps it's giving love generously by giving voice to the voiceless. The 10 lepers let their voices be heard as Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. We hear about this in Luke 17th chapter. This area was considered undesirable territory. Jesus writes in the 17th chapter, as he entered the village, he was pressing on toward Jerusalem, taking a road that went between the border of Samaria and Galilee, considered an undesirable territory. And on the outskirts of the border along the road, he was greeted from a distance by 10 who were under quarantine because of an ugly and disgusting skin disease known as leprosy. They were practicing social distancing when social distancing wasn't cool. Right? Jesus, the lepers, it says, shouted out, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." And as I was working on this, I just imagined that they were like this little kid holding this sign. Jesus, have mercy. I matter. The world doesn't think so much so. But Lord, have mercy.
Have mercy.
And so Jesus, the scripture said, "Go now and present yourselves to the priest for inspection of your disease." They went. And before they reached the priest, the scripture says their skin disease was healed, leaving no trace of the disease that scarred them and separated them from their community. One of them, the instant he realized that he had been healed, turned back to Jesus, shouting praises to God. He prostrated himself face down at Jesus' feet. And then he said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." And Luke writes, now this fellow happened to be not a Jew, but a Samaritan. And Jesus said, "Did not all 10 receive the same healing this fellow did? Where are the other 9? Was the only one who came back to give God praise an outsider?" What? To the Samaritan man, he says, "Get up, go on your way. Your faith has made you well." Right? Sometimes we just got to offer a little bit of thanks for what God has done. But so many times we come in here when times are hard, and the boyfriend left, and the job ended, and the diagnosis came, and we get what we need, and then we don't see it around here no more.
What? You better
We
go
leave out
on.
again
You better go on.
because we just don't stick around long enough to give thanks. Y'all, it was last Friday, and we were marching on the streets for that march of mourning and reconciliation. And Joel had his phone, and we were Facebook Live, and we were walking through the streets, and Joel was capturing the signs of the people that lived on the apartments nearby. It said Black Lives Matter, and Joel was talking to people on the street. You can just imagine Joel talking to me and everybody that would talk to him. And we were walking along, and we were about 3/4 of the way to our destination, to the corner of Church and Division there at the Amway Center. And we were walking, and all of a sudden Joel had just interviewed a woman from one of the churches, and she was giving God thanks for just being able to do this and seeing all the diverse people out there marching and just praising God for what she was witnessing as an African American woman. She was giving thanks, and then we walked just a little bit further. We were almost to our destination, and Joel looks over at me and says, "Well, how you doing, RT?" And you know what I said? He said, "You're hot." It was hot, and I was miserable. I said, "I'm melting." It was so hot. And then the minute I said it, I felt like one of those 9 lepers. I missed the whole point. You see, I was more concerned at that moment about my own comfort than the purpose for which we were walking.
Bring it real. That's
Because
it.
I was hot, but I was alive.
Yeah.
It was hard to breathe, but I could
Good
breathe.
Yeah.
Right?
Come on, preacher.
And I felt so ashamed.
Yeah.
I missed an opportunity to give thanks for what God had done and what God was doing. That I had the ability to walk the 1.5 miles down that road and then stand and give witness to people declaring that Black lives really do matter. And I believe it with all of my heart. But how many times have I missed an opportunity because I was too focused on what was in it for me
Yeah.
and what I may be missing at the moment?
Right.
I don't want to miss those opportunities anymore.
Yeah.
I want to be like the one
Who came
despised leper who showed back up
Amen.
to give God thanks for what God had done to transform him. I told the saints gathered the other night at Pulse, there was no chance in the world that I would have been there that night. Not a chance in the world. But many of you could have been there. And we talked about it. And you decided not to go, or you weren't going any longer because you had to get up and come to church the next day. Some of those were there, not thinking they would never make it out. And so while I still have breath in my body, I want to lavish love on God's children
Jesus.
so that I might be the person God created me to be.
Amen.
So saints, do no harm, even when harm comes your way. Saints, give love generously and freely. It won't cost you a thing.
Right.
And then never forget,
No.
like the Apostle Paul said, to give thanks in every circumstance. Saints, I believe when we do, that we'll be able to tell the story of how we've overcome.
Hey, 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 hey!
Hate harms, but love heals. Hate tries, but love wins. Love always wins. May it win in us and through us in the name of Jesus.
Hey, thank you, God.
We dedicate this to the 49 lives that were lost and their families who still yet grieve them, and all of us who will never forget it.